Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Skip Mason,
pastor, preacher, historian, author,
teacher, librarian, archivist, world traveler,
collector, family historian, avid reader, and creator of the popular Vanishing Black Atlanta Facebook page.
With a lot of folks who love history.
Most importantly, he's our dad who loves his family and who taught us the importance of our history and having important conversations.
Join him now for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Skip.
My goodness, I get chills watching that. It is hard to believe that it has been 45 years since the airing of the epic miniseries Roots, which not only changed the conversation and dynamics of race relations, but it brought to light for 7 consecutive days the story of an African-American family from one generation to another. I was 14 years old at the time, a 9th grader at Thurl High School in Atlanta, and my life was forever changed as a result of being made to watch this epic miniseries. So I am excited today that we get an opportunity to revisit Roots and to look at the impact of that book, the epic book Roots, that many of you are familiar with, and you should have a copy. I have my copy here with me, and also the impact that it has had. Let me greet our senior bishop, Bishop Lawrence Reddick, and Mrs. Wendy Reddick. Let me greet the College of Bishops and their spouses, chaired by Bishop James B. Walker. Let me also greet my bishop, Bishop Thomas Lewis Brown, and Dr. Louise Baker Brown. Let me thank Dr. Teresa Duhart for her tremendous support. And let me thank each of you for tuning in Sunday after Sunday, whether it's live, whether you view it later on Facebook or YouTube. You have blessed me by sharing in this platform and in this medium. But before we get into the celebration and honoring and remembering Roots 45 years later, Alex Haley and his family, who were lifelong staunch CMEs in Henning, Tennessee, I want to pause for a moment because on yesterday we received the sad news that the 60th bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Godwin Umoate, received his wings and transitioned. Bishop Umoate, a graduate of Lane College, had an extensive pedigree of education and training, and was beloved and revered on the continent of Africa. And so today we mourn with Sister and Lady Elizabeth Umoate and the Umoate family. And on next Sunday at this same hour, we will remember and celebrate the life of Bishop Umoate with some very special guests of people who knew him and loved him. I want to take a point of personal privilege. Uh, about 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to engage with Bishop Umoate and to ask him if he would not mind spitting in that little tube and taking the DNA test, because I was determined that I was going to find someone here in America who had taken the test that he matched a distant cousin separated by the enslavement of African ancestors, and he was more than willing to spit in that tube. His results came back, and indeed we found many matches. One in particular was a cousin by the name of Stephanie Bidens out of Charleston, family out of Charleston, who was a DNA match to Bishop Immorte. And many of you saw the interview that I did with him on last year, and we reunited the two. We'll miss Bishop Immorte, and on next Sunday, we will have an opportunity to remember, to reflect, and to share with him. A couple of announcements before we move and bring up my very special guest. On this coming Tuesday, we will have an episode of See Me Grow Dialogues on Developing Vibrant Congregations, hosted by Reverend Dr. Leon C. Moore, the General Secretary, Evangelism and Missions. The discussion leader will be Reverend Dr. DeAndre Thurman, and the guest presenter will be Reverend Dr. Richard Shaw. And so we invite you to tune in on that. Also, the Pauline B. Grant Status of Women's Department presents the second annual International Women's Day observance. Hashtag Break the Bias, Saturday, March 5th, this coming Saturday, 5 o'clock Central Standard Time. And the program will highlight missionary service and outreach, but also the female aspirants for the office of bishop. This should be a great program. And in addition, there will be a lecture, Etiquette is for Everyone, presented by the First Lady of the CME Church, Mrs. Wendy Jones Reddick. And so we look forward to having that conversation. Alex Haley's book, Roots, is epic. Despite any of the challenges that it may have received later on down the line, there is nothing that can take away from the impact that the book and also the miniseries had. And much to our love and joy, in reading the book towards the end of the chapter, you begin to read about the family's involvement with a little church that they established in Henning, Tennessee, called the New Hope. May I read just a couple of brief passages out of chapter 115. The New Hope CME stewards, Chicken George, Tom, and his brothers had contributed the money to buy pencils, tablets, and primers on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Since she taught all the children of school age at the same time, Sister Carrie had pupils ranging from 5 to 15. And so we see the ancestors of Alex Haley establishing not only the church, but also establishing the school. In chapter 116, the third Sunday, they were married in the New Hope CME Church. 10 months later, in the company room, Tom and Irene's in their new 4-house, Will proposed to Cynthia, and they were married in the New Hope CME Church. And then there's another reference. The New Hope CME Church was packed on Sunday. It had been circulated that Bertha's, which was Alice Haley's grandmother's, both from college, would be in attendance. He arrived under the searching scrutiny not only of Will and Cynthia Palmer, but also the entire Black community. Also, we'll see in the movie Roots, The Next Generation, and I never noticed it, never paid any attention to it, but take a quick look at this clip. Well, obviously they're staring because you got a white man in the Colored Methodist Church at the turn of the century. But I never connected. I just never paid attention to that particular fact. Take a look at this, and I'm going to bring my wonderful guest up.
Well, Alex Haley is perhaps best known for writing the book behind the ABC miniseries Roots. More than 40 years after Roots was released, we went searching for the hidden history behind the popular author in his childhood home of Henning, Tennessee, just 50 miles northeast of Memphis. In 1977, a record-breaking 130 million people tuned in to watch the miniseries based on Alex Haley's groundbreaking book.
It was bigger than the Super Bowl on television.
The book and miniseries raised public awareness of African American history, and it began an interest in family roots, DNA.
Alex's family was prominent in this area.
But just who was Alex Haley? Born on August 11th, 1921, Haley grew up in Henning, Tennessee.
Alex's mother never wanted him to forget his upbringing.
Richard Griffin is the site manager and curator of the Alex Haley Museum and Interpretive Center.
His grandmother sat there, Aunt Liz and Cousin Millie. And these are the three ladies that Alex learned all about his family.
Walk through the museum, and the first thing you'll see is Alex Haley's director's chair from the set of Roots.
Each day on the set, Alex sat in that chair.
And a very famous hat.
This is Chicken George's hat.
This is Chicken.
This is Chicken George, so you have to stop and take a look at the hat.
And everyone comes to see the hat.
And exhibitions covering Haley's life, including this life preserver from the Coast Guard boat commissioned in his honor.
Alex spent 20 years in the Coast Guard. This is where he did all of his writing.
You'll even see this.
Tell me about this slave ship.
This is an awesome recreation of the slave ship that brought many here to these shores.
Alex Haley put Henning on the map.
Boris Douglas is the mayor of Henning. He remembers Alex Haley from when Haley would visit his grandparents.
Every time we'd see him, we'd typically have on a flannel shirt, khaki pants, loafers.
Douglas even remembers a few of Haley's favorite side dishes from when Haley dined at his grandparents' home.
Greens and cornbread, sweet potatoes, and things like that.
We chatted with the mayor in the lobby of the Alex Haley Museum, just a stone's throw away.
That's where he started it all at.
Haley's childhood home. His mother, Bertha, also grew up in Henning. The family dining room, the breakfast area, and the kitchen left as it once was, and the parlor still the same.
He was so personable. He would make you feel special at all times.
Charlotta Campbell Norfolk, the museum's former executive director, shared Haley family stories and memories of the literary giant.
He had the knack of pulling you into a story at any time.
Now, tomorrow, I speak in depth with Charlotta Campbell Norfolk, who ran the Alex Haley Museum from 1988 to 1993.
Well, my brothers and sisters, today I am joined by the cream of the crop of family historians and genealogists known throughout the land. These individuals' resumes and vitas are yay long. They publish, they give workshops. They are authorities in their specific areas of interest. And I am so delighted that they have joined me today. We have Angela Walton-Raji. Sister Angela, of course, is a historian, a genealogist, and she specializes in Native America, all right? All y'all talking about y'all got Native Americans in your family, you need to see Sister Angela first, so she can guide you. She's a published author, and I have just much love and admiration for her, and so glad that she is here. We also have here Jari Honora, who specializes in Creole and Louisiana research. Of course, he has on his Mardi Gras beads because it is Mardi Gras season. He's a young brother, but he is very engaged and very active, and he's going to tell a little bit about some of the research that he's been doing. We have Sister True Lewis. Lord, what can we say about True Ann Lewis? She is a genealogist, BlackProGen, a blogger, and a panelist. She is a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Oh, y'all need to ask her about that. among other things. And she is a good friend and sister, and I just love her dearly. And then last but not least, we have James Morgan III, young man, historian, genealogist, author of uh, books on Blacks in the Masonic organization. He really is one of the authorities on Black Masons in the country, having published a premier book that I'll share later. So let me welcome my esteemed guest today. Glad to have you on. It's an honor. So my first question to you, where were you in 1977 when Alex Haley's epic miniseries aired on Roots? I'm going to start with you, Sister Angela, and welcome.
Thank you so very much. A pleasure to be here and an honor. I was living in Boston at the time. I had moved there in 1976, and I'm probably the eldest one here on this panel. And I want to sort of preface that with a year or so before, I had gone to Washington, D.C. On a trip and had visited, many of the sites that people visit when they go to Washington. And one of the things that was going on in Washington right at the time was the incredible exhibition on Tutankhamun. Remember, King Tut was going on. And I remember standing in line and looking at just some of the crowd when you're around your people. And there was this one young woman who was very much engrossed. She was reading Roots. She was standing in the long lines, but she had Roots, and that had the book itself. And that reminded me that, oh my God, I still need to get a copy of that book. I hadn't read it yet. And so eventually, upon returning to Boston, I did get a copy. And so before 1977, I had an idea of the story itself. And I can only say that there were some pages in the book that became my inspiration, because the story itself was fascinating enough. But the question I had to ask was, how did he do this? How did he find this? I was interested in his journey. And I'm always interested in the story of the journey of how people find their stories. And there are several pages where he goes into quite an amount of detail, talking to Aunt Liz and talking to, calling her up saying, I need some prayer right now. And I remember thinking, well, yes, we all can benefit from that prayer. But at the same time, I became intrigued when he started describing his journey, going to the Library of Congress at that time. And of course, years later, I was actually ended up meeting some of the people who ended up helping Mr. Haley with his process. But I became inspired. And of course, watching the miniseries, the clip that you showed at the very beginning, while I was just watching that a few minutes ago, I got chills again watching it. And I remember the impact of that. And that just reinforced that question. How was he able to get to this? How was he able to really do what many of us want to do? And I guess my reaction after the series was over was that we all have our own Kunta in our family. We have Kunta and we have Kizzy and we have Chicken George, and we have those generations that went through that period of enslavement, which many of us are now, of course, embarking on that journey to find that part of the story. But I was still intrigued with how was he able to do this? I want to be able to do this. A second book that inspired me right afterwards, well, a few years later, was a book that was written by another woman who was also inspired by Alex Haley. And this is a woman from Tidewater area in Virginia, Dorothy Sproul Redford.
Yes.
And she wrote the story of how she was so inspired and she wanted to be able to do some things. And she talks about her journey. Again, how was she able to do this? And I'm fast forwarding a little bit in terms of the inspiration that she gave me. But then it made me reflect, because the year after that, actually that summer, I remember going home to Western Arkansas. My home was Western Arkansas and Eastern Oklahoma. And my grandmother was living with us at the time. And I said, you know what? I don't have an Aunt Liz, but I still got grandma. And I decided to sit down. And my first official genealogical act occurred. I got out a pen and paper and said, Grandma, tell me anything you can remember about your childhood. And I began to talk about it or listen to her. She spoke about it and she dropped all kinds of gems. I didn't know they were gems. Some of them years later, I would find out what she was talking to. Yeah, Papa had all this land. I don't know how he got that land. Well, it turns out he was a homesteader and others were homesteaders in the family. But that was what had happened. And I still go back to watching Roots and realizing I've got to talk to grandma. And thank goodness I did, because a year and a half later, after I spoke to her, she passed away.
Oh, wow.
Thank goodness I had spoken to her.
Yeah.
And I thank Alex Haley for describing his journey of how he did what he did. Because we all have that story of those generations and the different things and the challenges that they met and some of the cruelties that had happened. But the how, it was the first time anyone in any arena had ever given me even the remote idea, I can do this.
Yeah.
So
and
I'll just stop right there.
I think that's what we all came away from watching.
Yes.
Let's listen to this, and then Jari, I'll get to you.
Us there in Henning. And gradually each sister answered and said she would be coming and when she was coming, and whether or not she'd be coming on the Greyhound bus or the Illinois Central line that we call the IC line. And Grandma would take the letter. In fact, Grandma couldn't really read. She would get my mother to read the letter, whereupon Grandma would snatch it, now having learned what it said, and act as if she was reading it. And she would go in the kitchen and get the calendar hung up on the wall over the wash basin. And she would mark who was coming when. And we watched that calendar like hawks as the summer came closer. And when somebody was due, we would dress up Sunday best, go down, meet them at train or bus, and there'd be all kind of screeching and hollering and going on. And then troop back up to the house. And pardon me, and in this way, 5 sisters came. Grandma made 6. And they just would go into a frenzy of just being together. I remember how it used to be that sometimes 3 or 4 of them would just happen to converge in the same room. And they would just stop, and they had a little thing they worked out. I know they never discussed it. They just did it. They would stop and put their hands akimbo on their hips and mock glare at each other. And then they would burst into laughter and all rush together hugging each other. And it was such a marvelous thing to happen in the house, which had been so gloomy, so dismal since Grandpa died.
So I think that the joy of Alex Haley was that he was a storyteller.
Yes.
And that there was no story that was not important, no detail that was not important in the narrative of our families. Jari, where were you in 1977? Or if you were not born in 77, when did you first watch Roots, and when did you become aware of Alex Haley?
Well, Dr. Skip, I was not born in 1977. As they say, I wasn't even a twinkle in my mother and father's eyes at that time. But the first time I remember seeing the miniseries Roots, I suppose I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. And it was announced, in the days preceding the program that Roots would be re-aired on television. And, as many of the family as possible were gathered together to watch this, because it was definitely instilled in us that this was something important. I was fortunate because I was reared by my maternal grandmother. And so on a daily basis, almost, little bits and pieces were shared with me. Things that were family history, things that were neighborhood history, community history, cultural history. I tell people all the time that, especially with the post-Katrina environment we still find ourselves in, I was reared in New Orleans within, just a few blocks of where I started school, where my mother started school, where my grandmother started school, where they had grown up. And so just in the car, passing different shops and different churches and different landmarks was an opportunity to share history. So very much a similar experience to Alex Haley with the storytelling, the oral tradition.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? The power of the second go round of Roots, the rediscovery of this sacred story, both the book and the miniseries, influencing a new generation of researchers and scholars. True, where were you in 1977 when Roots aired, and how did it impact your life?
Well, in 1977, I was 9 years old, so I was born. And I was living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You have to remember my dad was born in 1918 and my mom was born in 1923, and they're from Alabama, Midway, Bullitt County, in that southeast corner there. And they're grown. They were already married for like 25 years before I came. I'm their oldest son's daughter, but they legally adopted me when I was a newborn. So I grew up with these older Southern parents. And that night that it came on, I do remember, I just remember being scared. I was happy. We were laughing. There were times when we were crying, but that kind of started on my search for my family history, because after Roots came on when I was 9, I would just, something just came in my spirit. I just can't explain it. There's no words to it. And it just seemed like it just kept on nagging me all my life till I was about 30. But in between 9 and 30 is when I really started listening to my aunties, started listening to my mom and dad's conversations. I'd be under the table. I was that daughter that was behind the door when the grown folks were talking. I was taking all this in. I didn't know what it was until, like I said, until I got grown. And then that's when all the walls kind of came down and I knew what I was supposed to do with all those little secrets I was keeping in my heart. And I asked my dad one day, I said, Daddy, I said, do because we didn't know our grandmother because she was already gone in 46 before we were all born. And that's how it got started with me. I asked Daddy, who is your mother? And he said, well, my mom was an Ivory. And then that's when he said her name was Eddie Lee Rosanna Louisiana Savannah Ivory Lewis. And there were clues later on. I know about the Louisiana and why her name has Rosanna in it. And then he said, and I knew my granddaddy too. And I was like, well, who was that? And he said, my granddaddy was like Ivory and he was a slave. And he had 23 kids. And that is when I got 30, I'm hitting close to 60 now. But that's what I've been here to do, is to continue what my aunts and my family started in the 70s, because he had about 13 kids still living in 74, and they were determined to continue Granddaddy Ike's story. So I'm kind of picking up the mantle from where my aunts and all them on both sides of my family. I'm there to pick the baton up and carry it on. I saw the shift, and I thought I wasn't ready, but I was ready.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. That's great. James, tell us where you were when you first saw Roots, whether it was in 1977 or another time, and how did it influence your life?
Well, I, like my good brother Jari, share a similar affliction in that the constituent parts that make up all this chocolate goodness had not come together yet. For me to be there in 1977 in the physical form. However, I did see Roots. The first time I saw Roots, I can distinctly remember it. I was in the kitchen. I was 7 years old. So this is taking you to about 1997 or 96. I was in the kitchen and my mother was washing dishes. And at that time, we had a little small television that sat on top of the refrigerator. And I don't know what I was doing, but I just remember looking up and seeing this man here that you have displayed, Alex Haley, in a blue blazer, talking about, how he had researched his ancestry back to Kunta Kinte and all of this stuff. And of course, later on when I watched the series in full, which I want to say I was about 12 when I saw Roots, from beginning to end. But I remember hearing Alex Haley talk about his journey to understanding his roots and the research that he had done. And at the time, for me, it impacted me in a way that I don't think I appreciated at the time, but later on I would. And the reason why I say that is because if you go back, if your name was James Morgan III and it's 1996, 1997, you still have 3 great grandmothers living, a great grandfather still living,
Wow.
all 4 grandparents still living at that time, great aunts, still living. And so I tell people all the time, what part of the reason why I am the way I am, why I love history and genealogy so much, is because it reminds me of my childhood in a way, because I grew up around so many elders in my family. To me, watching Roots really inspired me in a way because to me, Roots is our story. Yes, it's the story of the Haley family. It is the story that Alex Haley put the paper, what have you, and how factual it is, where his imagination went or whatever. We can talk about all that, but the point is that if you are an African American whose family went through the enslavement process here, and even if they didn't, there are things that you will understand. There's a certain rhythm, there's a certain beat that you will understand. So maybe your family isn't from Henning, Tennessee. Maybe they're from Dothan, Alabama, like mine, which is not too far down the road from where True Lewis's family was, right? Maybe they're from New Orleans. Maybe they're from out there in Oklahoma and Arkansas, or Georgia, wherever. But there are certain things in Roots that are recognizable. Maybe you wasn't the CME Church. Maybe like my family, you had some deep ties in the AME Church or the AME Zion or whatever it is. There are certain things that you're going to pick up. And so for me, personally, having watched it, it showed me that what Alex Haley did could be done, and that it also was important and that there was value to it, not only from a personal level, but as I grew and matured and whatnot, it also showed me the scholarly value of it as well. The scholarly value of sitting down as Angela, I call her Auntie Angela, as Angela Walton-Raji was just telling us, there's scholarly value in taking serious what Grandma said.
Yeah.
There's some scholarly and intellectual value in taking serious what Auntie such and such and Uncle such and such, what they remember from their childhood or what have you. And yeah, maybe the books don't have it in there, but Uncle Cedric, he was there. He saw it, and so it's up to us, I think, as Alex Haley so ingeniously showed, and I love that you have that picture right there. It's up to us sometimes to sit down with our pen and paper, as he's doing there, or with our MacBooks and our iPads and our phones and our this and that, and record these stories so that they are added to somebody's archive.
Yeah,
that to me is one of the most important things about what Alex Haley did, and that's what I think I've basically dedicated my life to being able to do. And I know I can vouch for each one of you here, having worked with all of you. I know that you all are just as dedicated as well. And so we have work to do, but Alex Haley definitely laid out a blueprint for the work that we're doing now, and I'm honored to be here today.
Yes, he did. Thank you all so much. I'm going to come back to you. I want to share this clip.
We will accompany Alex Haley on a triumphal and an emotional return to his ancestral village of Jufere on the west coast of Africa, where during a 12-year search, he found his roots. We will see how roots affected an 18-year-old student who portrayed Kunta Kinte in the television film. And we will accompany that student, LeVar Burton, on a pilgrimage to the gravesite of Kunta Kinte in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. And finally, we will witness an unusual historic event that took place on November 13th, 1977, an event that perhaps best illustrates the true meaning of roots.
And so when we watch clips like that, we all can relate to our own story. We can relate to our own research experience. We can relate to those pivotal moments in our research where we uncovered information that we thought we would have never uncovered. And so all of us, whether we saw it in 77 or 92 or 96, all of us can relate to that moment. As I said in my opening, I was 14 years old, and I can't even describe to you the impact that it had, how it changed my life. So every time Alex Haley came to Atlanta, guess who was there? I made sure that I got nearby. Alice has signed more notebook paper and books for me than I care to recount. But it was the power of the pen. And in another interview, he talks about the timing. Okay, the timing of Roots. America was just a year out of the centennial of the sesquicentennial celebration. No, the bicentennial celebration. The bicentennial celebration, and it was time for the story of African Americans to be told. Now, all of you have done family history research on your own line, but you have also developed a interest and knack for certain areas of family history research. And so what I like for you to do, because one of the things that we want to do is not only to celebrate Alex Haley, and to celebrate the fact that he was proud to be CME. That's a little slogan that we have. We love the CME Church for what it stands. This is the New Hope Church in Henning, Tennessee. Of course, that's the old church, remodeled and renovated. But all of his family ties are there. And I'm going to share another little clip a little later. But Alex, I think, Angela, you said it earlier. What he did was to say you can do it too.
Yes.
And this is how you do it. These are some of the steps, that you do. So talk a little bit, Angela, about your Native American roots, because as we say jokingly in the Black community, everybody says they got some Indian in their family because grandma said it.
Mm-hmm.
And if grandma said that we got Indian in your family, then it's true that we do. But now that may not necessarily be the case. And DNA is also uncovering that you may have some, but you may have more European ancestry that comes up than the Native American. Talk a little bit about the work that you've done in that area. You are well regarded in Native American research, your book, Black Indian and Genealogy Research. And people come to you for resources, but talk a little bit about how you uncover and researching your Native American ancestry.
Well, thank you for asking. I grew up in Western Arkansas. If you know anything about that part of the country, my hometown is Fort Smith, Arkansas. And it's right on the state line, the border between Arkansas and Oklahoma. And if you live in a city like Fort Smith, which was a frontier city, just like Dodge City, Kansas, or Tombstone, Arizona, or, those Western frontier towns, it's a city where almost everyone in that city, if they are native to that region, almost everyone has heard more than one time a story of someone who was either a cowboy, an Indian, an outlaw, or a U.S. Deputy Marshal. And some of us have more than one category in our family history. And my great-grandmother, Sally Walton, you're showing her card, she was born in the middle of the Civil War in 1863, but she did not pass away until 1961. She was 98 years old. I was a little girl. She was my babysitter until I went to kindergarten and first grade. She was my heart. But I knew her. I loved her. And her history was not unusual for people in the Fort Smith or the two-state area of Arkansas and Oklahoma. She was Choctaw. Everyone knew that. She was a Choctaw woman. In fact, she's one of the faces on the cover of my book on Black Indian genealogy. You see her face. But she was the person, you see her 3 times. She's the woman at the top with the hat. She's the woman next to my great-grandfather, her husband, the first of 4 Samuel Waltons, by the way, in the family. And that's her, the face that I knew when she was in her 90s, in my early childhood years. She was a Choctaw woman. She spoke the language. She made traditional dishes. But of course, growing up in Fort Smith, we were an African identified family, an African American family. But Nana, she's Choctaw. That's something that we all knew. And many of the elders would talk about the time Uncle Joe, her half-brother, came to visit her. And when they wanted a private moment, yeah, wasn't that wild? They're sitting out in the backyard, both of them smoking a pipe. She had a little corn pipe that she would smoke in between her dipping snuff as well. But they would sit there talking in their native tongue, which was Choctaw. So this is not something that was unusual in terms of the knowledge. But when I had finally moved to Maryland in 1991, I decided, after I had attended a conference in Washington, D.C., a genealogy conference, gee, I wonder if I could go and really find something about Nana and her tie to the Choctaws. And one of the questions I had asked one of the presenters who was speaking about Native ancestry, what do you know about the Choctaw Nation? And he just said something in passing. Oh, that's Record Group 75 at the archives. That's 5 civilized tribes. And I'm like, okay, Record Group 75. That following week, I took a day off and I went to the National Archives. I remember it was a Friday. Wow. And as you shared 2 cards on top of each other, I found, not that one, that card. And as you can see, I'm looking through all these cards, names I don't know, until file number 777 popped up. And I hit the jackpot there. And I remember I'm sitting there on the 4th floor of the National Archives, the microfilm room at that time. And all of a sudden, Samuel Walton, Sally Walton, Sam Jr., Louisa Ingram, and I'm just sitting there going, oh, that's them. And of course, I'm getting loud now, and people are like, what's wrong with her? But if you've ever gone to a research facility and someone discovers something, you can hear people, sobbing.
We make noise.
We make noise. Thank you for understanding.
We show the jubilation. We show the excitement.
Thank you.
And even in Roots, there was a scene, James Earl Jones playing Alex Haley.
Yes.
I found them.
Yes.
I found them.
Yes, Aunt Liz. Yes.
All of us have had that moment.
We've had that moment. But then, as you show that card, can you show that card one more time? I'm going to show you what I did. You see Samuel and you see Sally. Now, I knew Sally, and this is a record that was created in 1899. I'm looking across to the right, and it says, slave of Emmeline Perry. And I'm having one of those, what you talk about, Willis moments. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? I knew her. She's just my great grandmother. What do you mean she was a slave of someone? And I realized, number one, that I had known someone in my lifetime who had been born enslaved. And also my great grandfather, Sam, there was a slave of Jim Davis across from his name. Wow. But then I began to look at other cards on the roll of microfilm. And I started recognizing surnames that I had grown up with. Brewer, Triplett, what? Wait a minute, Eubank, what? I know some of these families. And I realized something else. Some of the bravado that you hear on the playground when you're children. And, oh, my great-granddaddy was Indian. Oh, yes, he was Cherokee. And we all hear that. Yeah. But I began to realize, here's some of the names I grew up with. And they, too, were on these cards. Now, this was incredible because I realized something else. I made an appointment that following week at the Library of Congress to meet with Dr. Thomas Bloomer, who was the presenter at the conference I had attended, to ask him, what the heck have I found? And of course, he was astounded. And he said, people tell me all the time they have Native people in the family, and you're the first person I've ever met who's proven it. And then he said something that kind of scared me. Number one, his voice got really low. And if children are sometimes unruly, you can frighten them more when you lower your voice and get real quiet. So I'm thinking, what's this man talking about? But he said something to me almost in a whisper. And he said, and he's flipping through the pages, if you want to become an authority on this records, it's yours for the asking. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be an authority. I'm just trying to find my people. But I realized something else. I had found something no one had ever spoken about. I had been going to genealogy events and reading journals, and no one had ever spoken about 5 different Native American tribes that were all part of the Indian removal, the Trail of Tears, everyone hears about, but never, ever, ever had anyone talked about the fact that some members, certainly not all, but some members of the tribe were slaveholders, and they took people enslaved with them. And very much like the South in the United States, every white person did not own slaves, but many did. And many people of African descent also have white ancestry because obviously enslaved women, people had access to them.
Yes.
We know that from roots.
Yes.
And I also realized that Native Choctaw ancestry, someone obviously had access to her mother and grandmother, and that Choctaw blood came within a framework of the institution of slavery practiced by 5 tribes, as we now call them in Oklahoma. Officially on paper, they were called the 5 civilized tribes. And I'm thinking, what's a civilized tribe as opposed to an uncivilized? What do you mean?
Right.
Then I learned and saw records of Cherokee freedmen, Choctaw freedmen, my family, Chickasaw freedmen, Muskogee Creek freedmen, and Seminole freedmen.
Yeah.
And I realized not only did I have a sense of obligation to talk about it, but to write about it.
Right.
And as a result, I committed myself, and I'm still at it 30 years later, because that was 1991. So now 31 years later, as we're in 2022, I'm still exploring and still reading and still researching and still finding incredible things about individuals who were given that classification right before Oklahoma statehood, which happened in 1907. And in Oklahoma, right before statehood in 1906, there was a summary of all of the people that had been allotted lands. So Oklahoma lands could, the millions of acres that remained would be open for white settlers to come in and they could join the Union. Well, in 1906, a tabulation was done. There were 20,000 people categorized as freedmen or their children of these 5 nations.
Wow.
Yet, no one in the genealogy community was talking prior to that time about this population. And I realized I had made a commitment to myself and to assist others. And that's shortening a very long story, but
and so it's a very fascinating story. And so what you're saying, you know, and what we're saying is that you have to dig, you have to research. There may be records out there. That's what you all have specialized in uncovering. And those of you, my CME brothers and sisters who are watching, as we are in the process of reestablishing our archives, hoping to build a new archives facility that'll come up at the general conference, so be ready for that. That a place where we can have these records so people can discover. Jari, tell us a little bit about the research that you've done in Louisiana and Creole, because I mean, as complicated as you would think Native American research, the mixing down in Louisiana is extraordinary in some instances, you know, trying to but tell us a little bit about the research that you've done in that area for those of our members who have families who are Creole and who are from Louisiana, French, Haiti, etc.
Well, Dr. Skip, I'm going to take some of my time. And before I go into Louisiana, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be on this panel with Miss Angela, my ever erudite, ever knowledgeable friend from Maryland by way of Fort Smith, my fellow Catholic researcher, my fellow nation researcher. We always talk about the nation Negroes and the Creoles and all those folks, as well as our Francophile affinity, and True, another Afrogenius veteran, and also my co-fraternalist, Brother Morgan. It's just a pleasure to be with y'all. And Dr. Skip, your love for local history in Atlanta just makes you a kindred spirit with me down here in South Louisiana. And also, I have to recognize I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if I didn't recognize my paternal ancestors and living relatives who are all deeply rooted in St. James Colored Methodist Episcopal Church in Mount Sterling, Alabama. And
see, I knew it was a reason why I had you on this show.
Yes, and I have to recognize my 2 great uncles, the Reverend Peter Russell Dubose and the Reverend Chester Michael Dubose, who have both gone on to glory, but they were circuit riding CME ministers who had missions all throughout the Southeast, Florida, Georgia, Alabama.
My
And
goodness.
yeah, so those CME roots are deep. But
Yeah.
I was born and reared here in New Orleans in the Catholic Creole tradition in South Louisiana. And it's been a mission of mine to put that out to the general public. Louisiana is a unique place. We were the first place to enter the Union that was not taken from the Anglo-Saxon Protestant tradition, like the original 13 colonies and the few states that developed after that. In 1803, by way of a land deal, the greatest land deal in history, they tell us, the French Republic sold to the burgeoning United States, not only the modern state of Louisiana, but those states of Missouri and Illinois and Arkansas and all of those places that made up the Louisiana Territory, and particularly here in South Louisiana, the most heavily populated area, you had a population who ever since the colonial days, ever since the 1690s, had melded together with a few cultural characteristics, ethnic characteristics that define them, being Roman Catholics, being primarily Francophone, French speakers, although we won the Spanish control for about 4 decades. Very tight-knit family networks, a lot of fluidity in terms of social and economic lines. Louisiana, early Louisiana was settled primarily by men, not many French colonial women. And so early on, there was a high degree of mixing with Native women and with enslaved African women. There was ties to the Caribbean, to Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti, to Guadeloupe, Martinique, and other points in the Caribbean. And so it just gave us this unique culture that we call Louisiana Creole that has always kind of put us at odds with, I guess, with the rest of the country, but has also, I think, endeared us to a lot of people around the country. It makes research particularly interesting because even into the 20th century, my great-great-grandparents were married in 1906. Their marriage record is recorded entirely in French. Into the 1960s, it would not have been uncommon to hear members of my family and hundreds of thousands of others speaking French as a household language. Even in my own childhood, many expressions for household objects, for places, for relatives were passed down in the French language. So if I were to tell you that somewhere out there watching, I know is my nanan and maybe my parent, those would be my godparents. But those words first came to me not as godparents, but as nanan and parent, which is something that has been done here, has been recorded here ever since the 18th century, and I'm very, very proud of that.
That's amazing. And also, I think tell us about. Let me put this picture up as well. I think, is this the Knights of Claver?
Yes, that's the Knights of Peter Claver, which is a historically African American Catholic order of a fraternal order, founded 113 years ago this year in Mobile, Alabama, down on the coast, and now is international in scope. We're in about 35 states in this country and in Colombia down in South America.
And I put that up sort of as a segue to James, because in our research, we're finding that our ancestors were part of social institutions and cultural organizations. I mean, researching is not just name, date, and cemetery where you were born, but it's fleshing out those activities and organizations that they were involved in that are very much close to our community and close to our culture, which is a great segue for James, who has written about Black Masons, his book, The Lost Empire. Let me put my Dollar Tree reader glasses on. Black Freemasonry and the Old West, James R. Morgan. We have this book at the Voorhees College Library, but he is becoming one, if not one of the major voices and authorities on Black Masonry. In fact, I was thinking about doing a show because we have a number of pastors and preachers who are in Masonic organizations, Eastern Star. The church not only served as the church, not only as the school, but sometimes it was a Masonic hall, or there was a Masonic hall nearby as well. But James, talk a little bit about your research in the area of Black Masonic history and the importance of that in our community and the telling of our narrative of family stories.
Sure. Well, I know, you're talking about our resumes, Brother Mason. We know yours very well in terms of the history of Black fraternalism in America. And like Jari, I know I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, outside of Masonic ties, you share another tie with Alpha Phi Alpha with my grandfather and my great grandfather. So
exactly.
Even there is
right.
Roots are connected, right?
And let me just mention that Alice's brother George Haley. Let me shout out to George, and also I'm gonna let you come back, James. But when you get my age, almost 60, if you don't say it when it's on your mind, you will forget it. But Chris Haley, who is the nephew of Alex Haley, sent me a very nice note. I invited him to come. They had a conflict, but he said, "Thank you so much for hosting such a proud event and inviting our family to participate. Unfortunately, my schedule did not allow. However, wish you the best to you and your prestigious panel." He's talking about y'all, some of whom I know personally and fondly. My uncle would be humbled and honored. His uncle, George, Morehouse grad, ambassador, staunch CME, and a staunch member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. So I wanted to put that in it. This is George sitting with his brother Alice as they're interviewing, I think, one of the aunts or cousins. But sorry to interrupt, but it was on my mind. Back to you, Brother Morgan.
Oh, no problem at all. That's actually a perfect segue. When we talk about, Alpha Phi Alpha, Phi Beta Sigma, and the Knights of Peter Claver, and the Masons, and all these different things, Zetas and the Deltas and the AKAs, what are we talking about? In one aspect, we're talking about a connection back to our own African culture in terms of understanding that, unlike how we operate in this society where you turn a certain age and all of a sudden you're an adult. No. There's a process in place before you can be considered an adult in this community. And as we know, when you go back and you read Roots, which I encourage everyone, don't just watch the miniseries or the new version, the Roots 2000, whatever, the new one. Go back and read it for yourself. I got just like I'm sure all of you, I got my copy right here. Okay. And I went out and got Alex Haley biography too. I suggest you all check that one out as well.
And don't forget Queen. Don't forget Alex Haley's Queen.
That's correct. Absolutely. Yeah. Don't forget Queen. Exactly. So if we go back and we look at Roots and we read it, what was happening in Kunta Kinte's life right before he gets kidnapped into captivity? He's going through manhood training. He's going through rites of passage where he had to go off in the woods with the men. They had to show him some things, teach him some things about life, about what it meant to be a man in that community. And if we had more time, or maybe we need to get Netflix or somebody to do another film, we would know that if Kunta Kinte and them had some sisters out there, they would also be on the side somewhere learning some things from the women about some things that women need to know in that society. Well, what happens when you have mechanisms like that in place, and then you're kidnapped, brought all the way to the other side of the planet, and you're now forced to reconstitute some semblance of community? This is one of the questions that our ancestors had, not only in slavery, but for those who were fortunate enough to have either been born into freedom or to have emancipated themselves or to have obtained their legal freedom somehow. One of the ways that they did this was through fraternal organizations. Prince Hall Freemasonry being the oldest of these organizations, but obviously not the only one, served a very unique and interesting purpose. In one way, it's a way of networking. These organizations were a means of having collective work and responsibility for things in the community. So we know that there's a very, very close connection between early Black fraternalism, particularly Freemasonry, but others as well, and the Black church, because we understood that we had to, everybody, okay, I ain't got $100, but I got 2, I got 3, I got 4. Well, maybe we can build this church, and it may be the only piece of property we have in this town that we can control. But guess what? The Masonic Lodge is going to be on Monday. The Eastern Stars on Tuesday. We might have the youth group on Friday. We're going to have Saturday the deacons and deaconesses meeting. Sunday, everybody meeting, until you get these other institutions built. Have their own buildings. So there's very close connections. And for me personally, having joined the Masonic Order in 2010, I was very amazed to find that I knew that my grandfather and my great grandfather were both Masons, and at the time they were both still living. My great grandfather was still living at the time. However, I had no idea that I myself was 7 generations deep in one fraternal organization. And so for me, the idea of connecting that research with family history, with my own personal experiences, it's not something that's theoretical. It's something that's very real to me. And one of the reasons why I started doing that research, even when it came down to my book didn't start out as my book. My book started out as me assisting Denisha Swan. Again, you can see her name right there, my co-researcher. It started out as me helping to research one of her great uncles, Henry Bruce. He had been shot in April of 1869 out in Leavenworth, Kansas. And the gentleman who's on the cover of that book there, Captain William Matthews, and a group of about 12 other Masonic brothers, they rode up on horseback. They found the guy that had shot their Masonic brother, gunned him down in broad daylight, and got away with it. I was just helping her to research that story of her family history. Now, mind you, she's also connected to Senator Blanche K. Bruce, the first African-American to serve a full term in Congress. Henry Bruce, the man who had been shot, that was his older brother. I had no idea when I was doing that research that not only would I crack open the history of this family, but I would also crack open the true history of how Black Freemasonry spread to the Wild West. And guess what? Although I'm giving you all some tidbit names right now, the thing that's important to understand is that just like with the story of Roots, the story of the CME Church, the story of the Masonic Lodge, or whatever, any type of organizations, you have these big figures that we all can know and the books are about and everything like that. But what I'm here to tell you all to do is get some of these books that we're talking about, or these books that are coming out. I have every single one of Angela Walton-Raji's books on that bookshelf right there. And when I hear about something going on in those areas, matter of fact, as she knows, I'm flying to Oklahoma this week for the first time. Guess what I'm doing? I'm going through, look, where do I need to go? What do I need to see? If you happen to get a copy of my book, which I hope you do, go through it and find out, well, wait a minute, we got some Claibornes in our family. You never know. You never know. And so that for me is the importance of organizational fraternal history. It's showing how your family, your little small town, to include Henning, Tennessee, how your little small town, the people, your uncles, your aunts, might have contributed immensely to an organization, to a church, or what have you, to a narrative that you may not have even explored yet. But on a census record, it might just say farmer as their occupation. That's the importance to me of researching Black fraternal organizations and just Black social life in general, because the census does not capture everything. Let me tell you, it doesn't.
It does not. And as much as we are in anticipation and counting down for the 1950 census to come, but we realize that it doesn't. Let's take a look at this clip.
Oh, that.
And so I commend the Haley family for preserving the legacy that he created. Alex Haley was not just not was a storyteller for African Americans, but I think someone called him America's storyteller. And people like Skip Gates and Ken Burns have picked up that mantle of using documentary to tell the story. There was an amazing documentary last week on Fannie Lou Hamer, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And it was spectacular. It was magnificent. So now we have ways to document and tell the story. So true. Yeah. Okay. You had.
My
right
apologies.
ahead
I would just be remiss if I didn't mention one
Okay.
last thing. I got looking here in the chat. One of my star student, in fact, Sister Darnisha Pickett. She actually is a distant relative of the Haley family. Lives in Henning, Tennessee. She's a dynamic researcher herself on all things dealing with the sisters in the Order of Eastern Star. She actually put a comment here. She mentioned that she lives right near the New Hope CME Church, and she mentioned the fact that her father, who I have the pleasure of knowing, when he was master of his lodge, he actually laid the cornerstone for the New Hope CME Church building that you showed us earlier, Brother Mason. So again, these connections are here, and I didn't even know that until 5 minutes ago. So these connections are here.
So this is rich, and you don't know everything. We don't know everything, and people put in comments like this. This is important for me to know, for us to know that we have somebody connected to the church and to the land of the cornerstone. So everything is certainly relative. True, I want you to talk a little bit about your area. And then after which we're going to close out. I'm going to give you an opportunity to share your closing thought, and in that, encourage somebody to research their family history, to get started, or to continue to pick up where somebody left off. True, tell us a little bit about your research interests, please.
So I research in Alabama. That's my main focus, and it's really about my family. I don't consider myself a James or Miss Angela or like Jari there. I am trying to catch up on my family history. We had all these names and dates from 74, but no one went to the courthouse. No one went to the archives. Nobody sat down with the elders and wrote down what they knew. So that is basically for anybody out there that's listening. It starts with you. They always say when you start genealogy, start with yourself. Well, yourself can go and do exactly what I'm doing. I started with nothing. So once I started doing my Alabama research, and that's what I focus on slavery and on my lineage, I also joined society called the Daughters of the American Revolution. So with that, that's still, again, me tracing my family history and having it, somewhere archived, in a location there. And that's what your whole goal is to do, is to record your family history and start with yourself. I think another thing, how can I put that? Yeah, it's just I do Alabama research, but it's really me mainly focusing on my family right now. That's all I have time to focus on because we're so far behind, I feel. We've come a long way, but we still have so much more to go. And it's not about the length, it's about the depth for me. I'm trying to keep putting the what we say, the meat on the bones to my family history, not just the names and dates, but keep their legacy going and keep their names alive there. I had a class yesterday and my lecturer asked us, what are you going to share tomorrow that you learned here? And I think that, while you're chasing your ancestors, make sure too that you're recording yourself. You put my photo up there about my daughter dialogues. I'm so busy worrying about my family. Someone actually stopped and asked me about myself and what my lineage is. What is it? My story that I want to be left behind. So that now that story, someone stopped and talked to me for hours about my own life, and now it's up at Harvard's Schlesinger Library now. So I can kind of get that off of my back, because we're all of us, Angela's, James, we're all, you too, Skip. We're always going out getting our family history, but we don't. You have to remember, your viewers out there, they need to stop and make sure that they record themselves as well.
Yes,
I do want to reiterate that. So
and I'm so glad that you did, because it is important that we do it. Social media, technology has given us the means. Can you imagine, Angela and True, what would have happened 40 years ago if we had had a cell phone and a camera to sit down with our relatives? My great aunts, both of my grandmothers were deceased by 74. My mother's mother, 68, my father's mother in 74, and my granddaddy died in 96. So I did get a chance to speak with him a lot. He didn't know his father. He never knew his father, not even the father's name. Now DNA is pointing me in the direction of people who are possibly related to him on that line. But if we had had a cell phone where you could record, take video, oh my goodness, this dynamic would be different, in terms of that. So if nothing else, record your own story.
Don't forget to do that. That's what
don't forget to do that while we're busy trying to research everybody else's line as well. Another little brief clip, then we're going to wrap up. And I'm so appreciative of your time this afternoon. But I thought this was an important conversation. Once a year, I try to bring a group of genealogists on to talk about the importance of family history. But this year was special because it was a 45th anniversary, if you will, of the airing of Roots. Let's hear a little bit more from Mr. Alex Haley.
And then during the days, they would do different things. But it would be at night, after supper, as we called it, that the sisters would trickle toward the front porch. There were lots of rocking chairs out on the front porch now. It would be early dusk having turned into early dark. All around the front porch were thick honeysuckles. You know what honeysuckles are up here? Yeah, well, there were thick honeysuckles. And they have a heavy, sweet smell in the early summer. And they were all over the honeysuckles of what we call lightning bugs, flickering on and off. And Grandma and her sisters, every one of them, they get in these chairs, it would take maybe 5 minutes for them to get the rocking together. You don't just sit down in a rocking chair and start to rock, and you've got to get it at just the right angle, just the right cadence for your particular liking. And it would take maybe 5 minutes before they got this kind of synthesized. And then the next thing was out there in the dark, every one of them would do the same thing, and I know they never thought about it. They would run their hands while rocking. They'd run their hands down in their apron pocket and come up with a little cylindrical can of Sweet Garrett snuff. And they load up these lower lips and start taking little practice shots out over the honeysuckle vines. And I had the champion was my great aunt Liz. She had come from somewhere called Mulgee, Oklahoma, where she'd been teaching a long time. And Aunt Liz could drop a lightning bug at 4 yards when she was in good form. And they would just talk. They would just start telling stories about their family history that they had known. They talked about their daddy, Tom Murray, who'd been a blacksmith in Alamance County, how tough and stern he was and just unyielding, unbending. Everything about him was like iron. And they talked about their mother, whose name was Miss Arena, and then always said she insisted her name properly was spelled Arrena and not Irene, people like to call her. And then after a time, after having discussed their parents to their satisfaction, one or another of the sisters would make some sort of statement like, oh, he was just scandalous. And I came to know that once I heard that they were now getting ready to lay into their daddy's daddy. And this was the one called Chicken George, the gamecock fighter. He was always into things. He was a terrible sinner, they said. He drank whiskey, which was sinful. He would curse, which was even worse. They said taking the Lord's name in vain. And then it seemed there was a sin worse that even both of them put together that he was guilty of frequently, apparently. And they said that he was a womanizer. That's what they called him.
Well, we all have Chicken Georges in our family.
Well,
colorful characters, but I love it. You know, as a researcher, that their story matters. You know, and it is a part of the lore that we have come to learn about our families. Let's close out and have you make your final thoughts and encouragement of something of encouragement for someone that wants to do research. Certainly, it's another whole show to talk about researching your family history. And maybe I'll do that down the line, but I just wanted to pique the interest, particularly as we're celebrating one of our own. Angela, Sister Angela, we're going to start with you and just take a few minutes, a couple of minutes, if you will, each of you, and give us your closing thoughts, okay?
Well, one of the things that I said earlier when we started talking is that what I got from Alex Haley was even the suggestion that I could do this as well. That possibility planted a seed. And it would be maybe another 14 or 15 years before that seed was able to germinate when I made that first trip to the National Archives. But I realized not only did I have to nurture that plant as it began to grow, I was obligated to share with others how they could also plant that seed, nurture it, and find that story. I could do it, you can do it. But the one lesson I guess that I learned, though, is that we must always adhere to truth, not research to prove something, not research to find the Indian, to find another race, to adhere to truth, report what we see, and to stay really true to our ancestors. We don't want to make them what they were not. And at the same time, be open enough to receive what we find and to find that story. And dare, and it takes a little courage to do this, dare to write that story.
Yeah.
That takes nerve.
Yeah.
But once you do it, you realize, okay, it's all right. And not only can I do it, someone else might be inspired to do it as well. Yeah. So that's what I got from that. And I realized that perhaps it was going to be that 14 or 15 year wait from when I first saw roots to the time when I made that first trip to the National Archives in 1991, that maybe from wherever she is in glory, maybe Sally was nudging me. It's time, sugar, going up there and find my story. And I think of the other ancestors that I've also found, my Amanda in Tennessee and Mississippi, and Uncle Cephas, many of you have heard me speak about. And I realize I'm obeying them as well, but it's important to adhere to truth.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much. Brother Jari, your closing words.
My closing words would be geared toward everyone, but particularly to the members of James and I's generation, the millennials, as we're called. Archival sources tend not to evaporate into thin air. In fact, over time, archival sources tend to become more accessible as we digitize collections and record groups. But the one thing we can't replace is that oral tradition that we get from our ancestors, and to encourage people to utilize the cell phone, as you said, Dr. Skip, utilize the Skype, the Kindle, the tablet, whatever you may have, to capture those stories while the elders are with us. And also, this year is not only the 45th anniversary of the airing of Roots, but also the 45th anniversary of OGS, the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, founded in the aftermath, a few months after the airing of Roots, which is still the primary national body of African-American genealogy researchers. And we need more AUGS chapters, particularly in the South. We just formed one in Louisiana a little bit over a year ago, which I'm so proud of. But we need people to join that, as well as to join the small but growing number of African-American based lineage societies, the first being the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage, which honors heroic ancestors, not for military service, not for service in revolution, in the American Revolution, but for having built up this country by way of their labor as enslaved individuals.
Thank you so very much, Sister True, and Brother James will close out with you.
Okay. So I just want to say that, well, for me personally, this gift wasn't just given to me to keep to myself. I have to share it. And so that's why I say again, even if you just start with yourself and write down that one name, and sooner or later you're going to have this list that says, oh, we got everybody, but those people, those everybody's, their stories equal somebody. They are somebody, and their stories need to be told through you. So I just encourage everyone, just take a photo, and there you have it. Take a name and just keep adding and building to that. And you want to get it recorded and preserve your stories for your family, because there's babies that aren't born yet in your family, and they need you to be that person to start to write down that history, and so that they're not forgotten. And I just think about my grandma, Queen Daniel Miles, today. She died in August of 1977. And without her and all her daughters and her 3 sons, her 10 kids, and I knew all of them and her, that's why I'm sitting here today. I don't go a day without thinking about my dad. They're gone now, but their stories are going to live through me. And I have my own grandbabies, and they're listening to me like I was listening to them at the knee. Someone's watching you. Someone's paying attention to your stories.
Yeah.
Encourage them. Don't say, oh, baby, y'all don't need to listen to this or that. Let them listen.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. Brother James?
Well, I feel the spirit of my 3-time great grandfather, Reverend William Jefferson Hightower, coming over me right now. Since we're dealing with the CME Church today, and I guess my closing remarks would start off from the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, the 12th verse, where it says, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." That's what genealogy is, and that's what it's about. It's honoring your forefathers and your foremothers. If you go in the book of Matthew, the very first page doesn't start off with the story of Christmas. It starts off with a genealogy of Jesus, showing you where he got his authority from, even in his family tree.
Yeah.
So my question to everybody here watching is, where does your authority come from? I'm gonna stop now because I know my mother's watching. She's gonna say, I told you should have been a pastor. But that's my question to you all today is, where do you get your authority from as you go forward into this week and as we continue into 2022? Part of your authority comes from your ancestry, and we know as African people that we recognize that God, however you want to phrase that term, God in African culture is an ancestor. It's in our DNA to be great. So therefore, if you're not achieving your greatness, you're going against divine order. I would encourage everybody to make sure you check out Roots. Make sure you check out the books that have been talked about today. I would also just add one more book to your reading list, which is Reconsidering Roots. This was a book that was done to do a scholarly re-examination of Roots. Particularly, my favorite essay in here is by Dr. Francesca Morgan, no known relation, but Dr. Francesca Morgan did a really prolific essay in there called My Furthest Back Person. where she talks about how roots and the airing of it in the book, how it became the seed for not only for Black people to start researching their family history more and for genealogy, but also the seed for what's now a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes.
That's on the back of Alex Haley and of Roots. And I know there's some people out there who got a problem with it, but they just gonna have a problem with it. But the fact is, anytime you see an Ancestry.com commercial, 23andMe, all these different companies out there now, those people are in business. There are people who have whole careers because of this book right here.
Yeah.
And so it's important
You're
for
right
us to know that story as well and to partake in it. And as I said, and I'm going to close with this, let's continue to honor our fathers and our mothers because they truly deserve that honor and that praise. Thank you.
Thank you. And so what we've all been trying to say today is that Black ancestors matter. They matter. Your ancestors, my ancestors, they matter. There's another book that I want to share with you that if you don't have it, you must get it. It's called Help Me to Find My People, The African-American Search for Family Lost in Slavery by Heather Williams. It is a must-have because in the pages of that book, you see the compelling stories, one after the other, of newly freed, emancipated persons looking for mamas and daddies, brothers and sisters who've been separated, things we take for granted right now, placing ads in newspapers and Masonic journals and other church literature saying, I last saw my mother on this plantation. And I'm not seeing it. I'm trying to find my mother. I'm trying to find my daddy. I'm trying to find my sister, my brother. You all have been chosen. Since James want a bootleg today, we need to license him and get him a church since he want a bootleg today. But we have been called. I accepted that years ago that this was my calling. I was the one chosen in my family. Others are doing it too, but I know that I was the one chosen to continue that. And I wanted to make sure that my children, I want to share just a brief clip before we close. This was done about 10, 11 years ago. My son now is a freshman at Tougaloo College, but I set him down with his grandmother, my mother, who is now 88 years old.
I decided that I wanted to become a teacher. I had attended March Brown for 2 years. First, I wanted to be a PE teacher. Then I said, oh, no. Then I said, I think I'll become a nurse. And I said, oh, no, after I thought about it, because I don't like the sight of blood, so how am I going to become a nurse? So after going over...
So I just wanted to share that. That's one of the clips that I cherish tremendously. And both my daughter and son interviewed their grandmother some years ago because I wanted them to get it. They've grown up in a house with dead ancestors all around, family members. So they've gotten to know them. We stop at cemeteries, on family excursions. So they've gotten to know that this is a part of who they are. And one day after I'm long gone, all of this will be theirs. And so we have to plant seeds, as you all have said, as you've done, and teach and tell the story. I am so grateful to each of you today for spending some time with me. I respect you, value the work that you do, which is why I asked you to join me today, and continue blessings on the important work that you're doing. And we'll make sure that your publications are shared to the church. Hopefully, some of them are on Amazon and they can be purchased, or you can let me know how best to do that. But I am so blessed today to have spent this time with Sister Angela Walton-Raji, one of the godmothers of Black genealogy. Much love and respect to her. And to Brother Jari, Honora, such a brilliant young man doing such great work. James R. Morgan III, just wise beyond his years, and is doing critical work. And of course, True Ann Lewis, who is so modest and humble. But she is doing some great work and assisting others. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing with me today. Hang around for just a moment as I do my closing thoughts. As I close out, remember next Sunday, I will be celebrating on this show the life of Bishop Godwin Amorte, our 60th bishop, who transitioned to be with the ancestors on Saturday. And we will miss Bishop. But what I want to do now is, I shared the announcements earlier with you, so be mindful of all of the things that are going on this week, and go to the CME Church website so you can keep up with all of the great things that are going on. But I want to close out with this footage of Bishop Amorte dancing. He is now dancing with the ancestors. God bless you. And I look forward to seeing you all on next week. Same time. Be blessed in the Lord. Remember, Black ancestors matter.
Ah